Hi, my name is Dave Frank, and welcome to my 25th Internet Masterclass. I'm coming to you tonight live from Hari, NYC, a cozy jazz and yoga studio in Midtown Manhattan. It's the Christmas season in New York City, and everything is beautiful. My Xmas offering to you is a 4-part masterclass series called Beginning Jazz Improvisation. Tonight I'll present the first part, Intro to Chord Mapping. This video series is intended for musicians playing any instrument, including voice, as a way to begin improvising over the complex chord changes that form the foundation of jazz. This series has been designed for players that have 2 or more years playing in any style, and is especially targeted for those musicians who can improvise over blues, rock, and other musical styles who are looking to begin improvising in the jazz idiom. The most common question I get from aspiring jazzers is, how do you actually improvise the melodic lines when you play jazz? Where do the notes come from? How do you do it? The answer to that question lies in learning a 2-part process. I often think of improvisation as the letter V. One side of the V we can call musical elements. Musical elements are the nuts and bolts of the music that you're playing, such as the chord changes, the voicings, the scales and the arpeggios, etc. We'll cover a good deal of the basics of our basic musical elements in this series. The other side of the V of improvisation we call improv concepts. Improv concepts are the musical concepts that you use in order to make music out of the musical elements. These concepts include specific concepts of rhythmic placement, phrasing, resting, and the like. The application of these improv concepts that we'll study during this class series is the real secret to improvising jazz. Jazz improvisation is a natural human process that occurs spontaneously if the right elements are combined together. It's like a chemistry experiment. In order to get the thing to blow up, you have to put all the right ingredients in the beaker. If the right ingredients are combined in the right amount, combustion will occur naturally. In the same way, improvisation is a natural musical process that anybody can learn, provided that the right musical elements and improv concepts are applied as part of the learning process from the beginning. Tonight we'll begin this journey into jazz improvisation with a preparatory class called Intro to Chord Mapping. The difference in improvising in jazz as compared to, for example, improvising over blues and boogie is the complexity of the underlying chord sequence that forms the basis for the melodies that you will be creating. A good analogy for this is the difference between downhill skiing and slalom skiing. The concept of downhill skiing is fairly simple. Ski down the hill and enjoy the ride. This is like basic blues improvisation, where we're essentially dealing with an underlying chord sequence that often only has 3 chords and an improvisation that uses 1 or 2 basic scales. In slalom skiing, you not only have to ski down the hill, but you have to ski in and out of a complex series of gates, changing directions all the time. This is like jazz improv, where the underlying chord sequence is generally more complicated, and you have to flow through various scales without stopping. The ability to navigate complex changes is what makes jazz improvisation so interesting and challenging. Once you grasp the basic process, the possibilities inherent in jazz improvisation are practically endless. At the age of 58, I am endlessly improvising on the same tunes I was improvising at the age of 14. This is a groove, the ability to endlessly create new music over a complex chord sequence. It's a way of life. One of the interesting aspects of learning jazz is that everyone who teaches it differently. There are infinite ways to approach the infinite process of improvisation. I'll be sharing with you in this series the way I've approached teaching jazz improv for so far 42 years. If you feel like giving this a try, I think it's going to work for you. When you look at the chord sequence of a jazz standard that you'd like to improvise over, you'll generally see a 32-bar structure that appears to contain a complicated chord sequence. The art of jazz improvisation is to be able to keep this complex structure flowing in your mind in real time while improvising a new melody line that fits neatly over the chord progression. On the surface, this seems extremely complicated. However, there are keys to unlocking this process, and the first key is called chord mapping. Using the principles of chord mapping, we can reduce the task of improvising over a complex set of 32 chords to improvising over approximately 4 to 6 basic progressions. Knowing how to locate the common progressions that make up the 32-bar tune greatly simplifies jazz improv. Chord mapping a tune will immediately tell you which basic scales to use when you improvise. This knowledge, plus a few basic improv concepts that we'll study in the second part of this series, are the necessary ingredients to place in your musical beaker to get your jazz improvisation to explode. When you first look at a computer program, it will appear to be a super complex series of digits strung together. To the trained eye, however, the complex programs can often be reduced to a series of nothing more than ones and zeros. In a similar way, the trained eye of an experienced chord mapper will be able to quickly see that a complex jazz tune is actually composed of a series of basic, simple chord progressions. Recognizing where these simple progressions are in the tune is the key to chord mapping and goes a long way to make jazz improvisation possible. In tonight's class, we'll be exploring the basics of this process. What we'll study tonight will help you to map anywhere between 50 and 80% of most jazz standards. There are 4 basic progressions that comprise much of the harmonic language of jazz standards. They are 2 minor 7, 5 7, 1 major 7, 2 minor 7, 5 7, non-resolving, 2 minor 7 flat 5, 5 7, 1 minor 6, and 1 major 7, 6 dominant 7, 2 minor 7, 5 7, 1 major 7. These 4 progressions are the progressions we want to look out for when we start chord mapping a tune. Let's have a listen to these progressions. When speaking about basic chord progressions, you always have to have a key in mind. If we're in the key of C, for example, the 2 minor 7, 5 7, 1 major 7 progression means that the progression starts on a minor 7th chord built on the 2nd note of the C scale, since we're in C, which is a D, going to a dominant chord starting on the 5th degree of the scale, which is G. We're referring to the C scale always here, followed by a major 7th chord built on the 1st note of the scale, C major 7. So the basic 2-5-1 progression in the key of C is D minor 7, G7, C major 7. This is a very common sound to the Western musical ear. Probably 1 billion tunes start or end with this progression. For example, the standard Everything Happens to Me starts with this progression. I have included a chart in the notes of this class of all the basic 2-5-1 progressions in all the keys for your use. We'll be wanting to locate this progression whenever it occurs in the tune. When looking at a new tune, you can watch out for any chord sequence that has a minor 7th chord going to a dominant 7th chord going to a major 7th chord. The chances are good that you'll be looking at a basic 2-5-1 chord progression when you see this happening. Whenever you see this basic 2-5-1 sequence, you can use the scale of the 1 to improvise over the entire sequence. So if I see a F minor 7, B flat 7, E flat major 7 sequence, I can say that I'm on the planet of E flat during that entire section of the tune. And therefore you can use an E flat major scale to improvise over that whole section. Here's our 2-5-1 progression in E flat, F minor 7, B flat 7, E flat major 7. Now I can improvise using the E flat major scale over the entire sequence. Thinking this way, an entire jazz standard may include temporary visits to 3 to 6 key planets. Do you see where we're going with this? To start improvising in jazz, I'll want to be very clear when I'm improvising on a jazz tune that I'll be using generally 3 to 6 basic scales to improvise with that correlate to the key planets the tune moves through. The second basic progression is the 2 minor 7, 5 7 sequence that does not resolve to the 1 major 7. This progression can be found frequently in a large majority of standards. When you locate the non-resolving 2 minor 7, 5 7, you can also improvise using the scale of the implied 1 over this part of the tune. If we take a tune like Satin Doll, just that much. What we have there is we have 2 two 5 sequences that don't resolve. D minor 7 to G7. It would typically resolve to C major 7, but it doesn't in this case. And then we have E minor 7 to A7, which would typically resolve to a D major 7, but it doesn't in this case. So the progression itself is D minor 7, G7, E minor 7, A7. When we have our D minor 7, G7, we can improvise over the C scale, which is a scale of the 1 of the 2-5-1. You following me? And we go to our E minor 7 to A7. That's a 2-5 in the key of D, so we can improvise on a D scale there. And then we go back to a 2-5-1 in C. This will make real sense to you once we go 1 or 2 more segments into this 4-class series and we start talking about the improv concepts. Now we're just looking at the underlying sequences and how they relate to basic scales. Our third basic progression is the minor variation of the 2-5-1 progression. 2 minor 7 flat 5, 5-7, 1 minor 6. This is a super standard progression that can be found in maybe 75 to 80% of all jazz standards. When you see this little monster, you can improvise over the entire sequence using the harmonic minor scale from the 1. So in the key of C, 2 minor 7 flat 5 is D minor 7 flat 5, 5-7, G7, C minor 6 is the 1 minor 6 here. And we can improvise using the harmonic minor scale. Our last super basic progression will be the 1 major 7, 6-7, 2 minor 7, 5-7, 1 major 7 progression. In the key of C, the 1 major 7 is C major 7, the 6 dominant 7 is the A7, the 2 minor 7 is D minor 7, the 5-7 is G7, and the C major 7 is 1 major 7. Again, it's 1 major 7 is C major 7 because we're in the key of C, and C is 1. The 6 dominant 7 starts on the 6th note of the C scale, which is A. The 2 minor 7 starts on the 2 of the C scale, which is D. And the 5-7 starts on the 5th of the C scale, which is G. Over this basic progression, you can use the major scale from the 1, except for the 6th dominant 7th, where you have a couple of options. Over the 6th dominant 7th, you can improvise over the 2 harmonic minor scale or the 2 melodic minor scale. We'll improvise over the entire progression. Again, that's a C scale for the C major 7. And we can use either the 2 harmonic or 2 melodic minor scale for the 6th dominant 7. Sound like this. Or we can use this, which is the melodic minor scale from D. And then we go back to our C scale for the 2-5-1. I'll try this one more time and you'll see how I'm flowing in and out of the different scales. This is the slalom ski thing we were talking about earlier. These four basic progressions we just studied will very often comprise from about 50 to 80% of the chord mapping of a tune. I wanted to mention a couple of common anomalies. Say that 10 times. Common anomalies that you will frequently encounter while chord mapping and improvising. They are the flat 7 dominant 7 and 2 dominant 7. If we're in the key of C, you might often find yourself having to improvise on either a B flat 7 or a D7 chord. Both are outside the key of C, but when you're improvising in C, you'll frequently encounter them. Nobody knows why, that's just the way it is. In the case of the flat 7-7 chord, if we're in the key of C major, it'll be a B flat 7. You can use a scale we call the Lydian dominant. It's a major scale with a flatted 5th instead of a 4th and a flatted 7th instead of a 7th. Here's a B flat 7. This is a B flat scale with a raised 4th instead of a 4th and a flat 7 instead of a 7. This B flat Lydian dominant scale is a good one to use if you're improvising in the key of C and you see a B flat 7 chord. Against the 2-7 chord, you can commonly use the major scale up a 4th. If we're in the key of C, a 2-7 chord would be a D7, and we can use the notes of a G scale to improvise there. I wanted to mention those common anomalies because you're going to find them when you chord map and improvise. Let's look at a couple of tunes and see how this plays out. Okay, gang, let's see how this all goes together. Analyzing our favorite tune, Autumn Leaves, in G minor. When you first look at this tune and figure out how to improvise over it, you'll see a complex series of chords. What do you do with that? How do you improvise over it? The way you do it is to reduce the complex sequence of chords that we see to the basic chord progressions and improvise over the scales that are indicated by those progressions. This whole entire tune is just 3 different 2-5-1 progressions. One in B flat, which is here, and also occurs here, and one in G minor, which occurs here, and here, and here, and here, and a short one in E flat major here. The entire tune is just 3 different key centers or 3 different key planets, and we can use 3 different scales correlating to the planets that we're on. So we can use a B flat scale when we're improvising here, a G harmonic minor here, a G harmonic minor here, B flat major here, G harmonic minor here, a slight change to an E flat here, and back to our G harmonic minor. The whole tune, 3 key planets, 3 basic progressions, 3 basic scales to improvise on. This is a great way to get going with jazz. Here's a professional diagram of the chords of Take the A Train, or as Lawrence Welk used to say, take a train. This one's in the key of C. It starts out with a 1 major 7. It goes to one of our anomalies, the 2 dominant 7, D7. And then we follow it with a 2 minor 7, 5, 7, 1 major 7 progression in C. That's our 2-5-1. Again, 2-5-1 in C. And then the bridge, we go to F with a 2 minor 7, 5, 7, 1 major 7 progression in F here. And then it stays in F, goes briefly to G, 2 minor 7, 5, 7 non-resolving, remember that one? And it ends with a 2-5 progression that leads us right back to a C major 7. I'll go through that again. This whole tune is 1 major 7. We have one of our anomalies. The D7, we can use the G scale here. If we use the flat 5 on the D7, we can use a Lydian dominant scale on that one, and you can refer back to the B flat 7 from before. Then we just follow it with a basic old 2-5-1 in C, a basic old 2-5-1 in C. In the bridge, we go to F planet. Here, 2-5-1. It stays in F planet all the way to here, where we have G planet. We can use the G scale here, and then we're back to C. So take the A train is C planet. Anomaly in C. Staying in C for the whole entire A section. Moving into F planet, we can improvise with the F major scale here. Keep F planet and the F major scale going through all this 3 bars. Switch quickly to G here and back to C, and we're done. So rather than thinking that it's a complex series of chords and each chord gets a different scale, we can identify the progressions and use the basic scales to improvise. Voila! Jazz improvisation. Just add water. Thinking along these lines, you can see how we just simplified and clarified the process of jazz improvisation. A common error I see is that folks think that when improvising jazz, they should be using a different scale over every chord. When you first start improvising in jazz, you want to limit as much as possible the number of scales you'll be using, based on the chord mapping techniques we just studied. Later on, you can explore alternative scales to use to make your improvisation hipper and more varied. At the beginning, we want to locate our 4 basic progressions and 2 anomalies and improvise using the scales indicated for each progression for the entire length of the progression. How are we doing out there?
Woo!
Is this making sense to you?
Absolutely.
All right. To begin to get familiar with this process, take a tune or 2 per day and map out the chords along the lines of our class tonight. Whenever you see a chord or sequence that doesn't seem to fit the basic 4 progressions or 2 anomalies, leave it blank for now. We'll cover some more basic chord progressions and common anomalies in a future class, or you can look through the popular jazz literature, like Mark Levine's Jazz Piano Book or Jazz Theory Book, to get into this subject deeper. My intention tonight was to demystify the process of jazz improv a bit for you and get you started improvising jazz. You'll be amazed to see how much of a percentage of the chords in a jazz standard will fit neatly into the common progressions we study tonight. And from there you can easily determine the scales you need to begin improvising. In part 2 of this series, I'll get into the improv concepts that you can use to create original melodic lines using the chord mapping scale technique. I'd like to thank Pfeiffer Garbisi for doing the filming and editing and assorted sounds for this class, and invite you to send along any comments, compliments, complaints, or tomatoes to me at dave@davefrankjazz.com. Something tells me there may be a higher than usual amount of tomatoes, but send them over. I'll make soup. Blessings and Merry Christmas from New York City!